Let's start with the operations and the in and out adjustments of the through frame slide out system. So first you're going to make sure that your battery is fully charged and fully operational. Then you're going to want to make sure that if you have travel locks on your room, that you get those removed. Now what you're going to do is you're going to press and hold this extend button until the room is fully extended and the inner seal is sealed against the inside of your unit. If the inner fascia does not seal, you can adjust the outstop by adjusting this nylock nut and this jam nut. So let's adjust this a little bit. So I will loosen up the jam nut, and then I will adjust this nylock nut back to where that is, and then tighten everything up. And this will adjust the inner seal on the outstop. Now let's retract the room so that the fascia on the room itself seals against the outside of the unit. Now once the room is fully retracted, that's called your in stop. Now if the room doesn't seal properly on the outside of the unit, you can adjust this jam nut and this stop can to actually make it seal. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna extend it out a little bit to get some room here, and I'll loosen this jam nut up, and then I'll move it back a little bit so that's sealed. Once you get that jam nut tight against the stop can, you're gonna wanna tighten that up. And then retract the room fully, and it should be sealed. Now after you retract the room completely and one of the sides of the room isn't sealed but the other is, then you're going to need to resync the room. And you do this by the adjustable head assembly found on the idler arm. This arm does not have a drive mechanism on it. Loosen the bolts on the idler arm and push or pull the room to align with the drive side. Then what you're going to do is you're going to tighten those bolts back up and you're good to go. If you're not getting a proper seal on the top or bottom of the room, you're going to want to do a vertical adjustment. So step one, we're going to measure between this outer arm here and the bottom of the room. And we're going to do that measurement as close to the I-beam as possible. So let's take that measurement, and I get 5 1/8. And I'll write that down. Next, we're going to, for step number 2, we're going to measure between this inner arm and the bottom of the room. And we're going to do that as close to the head assembly as possible. And for this, I get 5 5/8. Now, to be within tolerance, these two have to be within 1/4. So we'll subtract step 2 from step 1, and we get 1/2. Now, to be within tolerance, this measurement here needs to be 1/4 or less. So now we know that the distance between the bottom of the room and the inner and outer arms is not within tolerance, and we need it to be closer. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to loosen up these carriage bolts on the head assembly. It's recommended to mark head assemblies to use as a reference during adjustments. Now that the room bar is loose from the head assembly, now we're going to loosen up the jam nut here. Once that's loose, now we're going to have to loosen this bolt, which lowers the room down. Once you have that, you're going to tighten up this jam nut. And once you're good with that, you're going to retake those measurements. Now we have a 5 1/4 and 5 1/2. And now we're within that 1/4 inch tolerance. Now, next, you're going to tighten up these carriage bolts. Now that this side is done, you'll repeat all of those steps on this side and make sure that that 1/4 inch tolerance is adhered to. Now that your head assemblies have been adjusted and you're within that 1/4 inch tolerance, you're going to want to check and make sure that the seal at the top and bottom of the room is adjusted properly. And you do this by running your room out and running it back in. Now, when the room comes back in, you're going to notice that the top of the room touches the unit first. And as you can see, there's a gap here where I pulled the room out and then I brought it back in and stopped it right when it touched the room. You can see that gap there. This is before the bottom seal actually seals, but I wanted to show you that because that is normal, and that's the adjustment that you're going to want to check after you adjust these head assemblies. So I'm going to pull that back in. Now you can see that it's sealed all the way along the top and bottom, and that's correct. Next, we're going to do our horizontal room adjustment. And you're going to do this adjustment when the room itself isn't centered in the opening of the unit. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to measure from the outside wall of the unit to the inside wall of the room itself. So we're going to do that and measure that. And then we're going to measure the other side in the same exact spot. So the room is actually off center a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch to the right in this opening. So I'm going to make that horizontal room adjustment. And to do that, we're going to loosen these carriage bolts here on both head assemblies. Once the carriage bolts are loose, you can manually push the room to where it needs to be. And you keep those bolts loosened, and then we're going to measure again. Same spot. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Now the room is centered in the opening of the unit. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tighten down the carriage bolts and make sure that the room is tight to the head assemblies. Let's take a look at troubleshooting the electric through-frame slide-out system. Now, what we did here is we put together a list of problems that you might see in the field. And on top of that, we put together a checklist that you can systematically go through and solve those problems. Now, for the first three, the room doesn't move, the room moves slowly, or the room moves but stops in the middle. first thing that we would do is we would check the battery, make sure it's at a full charge and that it's maintained at full capacity. But we'd also take that a step further and check the wiring in your system for loose wires, disconnected wires, or corrosion on the connectors themselves. So that's the first thing we would do. Now, for the second thing, let's go over here and take a look at this. You check for obstructions outside the unit and inside the unit. So if you look at here, you can see branches and sticks that are on top of the room. That might bind the room from opening or closing. And then also on the inside of the room, you might have pillows, teddy bears, or even luggage like the picture shows that might be obstructing the room from moving in and out. So double check both of those. Then you'll also check for adjustments. Now, adjustments can be vertical adjustments, horizontal, in and out stops, or synchronization. Now, you check these adjustments by doing a visual inspection. So let's go out to the bay and take a look at what that visual inspection consists of. So what we've done is we've taken this slide out and moved out a little bit so we can take a look at some components inside. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the horizontal adjustment inside the cutout of the slide out is equal on both sides. So we're looking at this wiper seal here and making sure that it has good contact on the outside of the slide out and that it's not crimped in or folded or broken, any of those. All the seal is nice and tied up against there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the other side and look at the other wiper. And again, we're looking at the wiper seal is all the way up and down on the slide out, making sure that that contact is there and it's not folded or broken or rotted. Now what we're going to do is we have the slide out open and we can take a look at the components inside. So we're looking at this stop can. You see this flange here on the stop can. Make sure that this is in good condition and not damaged. Now you're also going to look at these head assemblies. See that you have the room bar here and the head assembly here. You're making sure that there's 55% contact between the head assembly and the room bar bracket. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run this room in and make sure that the horizontal and the vertical adjustments are set proper. What we're going to do here is we're going to watch for synchronization. We're looking at the left side and the right side of the unit and that they're moving at the exact same time. Now when this goes all the way in, next we're going to be looking for vertical adjustment. Now the top of the RV slide out is going to touch first and then the bottom is going to suck in. Now that is a proper seal. So now that the room is actually sealed against the unit, we're going to take a look at these bulb seals and make sure that they are sealed up against the unit and that they're 50% of that seal is pressed up against that. And it's forming a good seal on the unit. And we'll check this other one too and make sure that it is sealed up against the unit. Now, if it's not, all of the adjustments that we've talked about vertical adjustments, we've talked about horizontal adjustments. If one side is not sealed up against there, then you know that it's not synchronized and you're going to have to go to that idler arm and adjust that. Now we're on the inside of the unit now and we're taking a look at the seals for the out stops. So when you run the unit all the way out, this seal here is going to seal up against this flange on the slide out itself. Now what we can do is we can look at this seal for damage or anything that could be obstructing the path of the slide out. So you're going to want this seal to seal up against this flange on the slide out itself. All right, so now that we did the visual inspection, if everything looks good, it could just be an actuator or motor. Now for the last problem that I wanted to cover, it is the motor runs but the room doesn't move. Now there could be a couple different issues there that cause that symptom, so let's take a look at it. Now for the first example here, we have a nylock nut and a jam nut, and they're nicely tight up against the front bracket, and it's going to drive that room in and out no problem. However, what could happen is the nylock nut or the jam nut could be loose or missing, and what will happen is that actuator will drive in and out of the front bracket without moving the room itself. So just double check the nylock nut and the jam nut that they're actually there and that they're tight up against the front bracket. For the second example, we have this gear pack, and you can see the spur gear inside there. Now, if the spur gear teeth are loose or missing, what will happen is that the drive mechanism will move the gear pack, but what will happen is it won't mesh against the drive rack on the inner arm, so the gear will move, but the arm won't move, and the arm is attached to the room, so the room won't move. In the event that you have an electrical problem, perhaps your battery is dead, you're going to want to utilize the manual override feature that's built into the through-frame slide-out system. Now there's a couple different versions of the manual override, but this one right here we're going to look at has an extension rod that attaches to the electric actuator motor, and that extends through the I-beam here, so it gives you access outside the frame. Now the first thing you're going to do is you're going to unhook that battery so you don't have electric backfeed preventing damage to the system. Now go ahead and connect the manual override crank to the extension rod. Now you're going to turn this counterclockwise to extend the room out and clockwise to retract the room all the way in. Now pay attention to the in and out stops. When you crank that all the way in, you'll feel the resistance there. Go ahead and stop. The room is completely retracted in. You can over crank this and damage the system. On the other version of manual override, you're going to not have that connector rod that goes through the I-beam. You're just going to have a hex nut attached to the electric actuator motor. And you're going to have to access this through the underbelly. But everything else applies. You're just going to utilize a ratchet here and attach it to the hex nut. So you're going to do clockwise to retract the room and counterclockwise to extend it. Most of the time, you're going to be retracting this in so you can travel with it. So make sure you get your travel locks on your room so you can get this into a repair facility. To maintain the system, you'll first need a fully charged battery and that is maintained at full capacity. Next, you're going to check the terminals at the battery, the control switch, and in the system for corrosion and if they're loose or damaged. Pay special attention to the motor leads under the chassis, as these are actually exposed to dirt and debris from the road. Most electrical system issues are caused by poor ground connections. We recommend utilizing star washers on your ground wires to ensure a solid contact to the chassis. In the event that your unit sits for a few months straight, you're going to want to run the room all the way out and all the way back in a couple times a month. And this is going to keep your seals and all the moving parts lubricated. Now on the electrical system here, you're going to want to check your stop can, your gear packs, the gear track on the inner arm here, and the cross shaft for any dirt and debris or external damage. If you have a squeaky gear pack, you're going to have to lubricate it. Let's take a look closer at an actual gear pack, and I'll show you exactly where to lubricate it. So here we have a gear pack that I've pulled off a unit, just so you can take a look at the parts a little bit closer. Now, if you have a squeaky gear pack, you're going to want to use dry silicone. No grease, no regular silicone. Now let's pull this apart a little bit and take a little bit closer look exactly where you're going to lubricate it. Now, What you're gonna do on the unit is you're gonna loosen these two main mounting bolts for the gear pack just a little bit so you can have access to the drive shaft. Now, to lubricate the drive shaft on the gear pack, you're going to take this red straw and get that all the way down inside there and lubricate the drive shaft at the point of contact of these side plates, the wheels, and the spur gear. Now, here's what you don't do. You don't lubricate the wheels or the spur gear at all. Once you get those points lubricated, you're gonna wanna then tighten those mounting bolts back up and run the room out a couple times. That way, that lubrication works its way into the drive shaft.